Venko Bogota, a young Slovenian ski jumper, stood at the top of the ramp, staring down at the snow-covered track below. With the crowd watching and the cameras rolling, he prepared for a jump he'd done many times before. But as he launched off the ramp, something went extremely wrong. His balance shifted mid-air, and instead of a clean landing, he lost control, slamming through a retaining fence near the spectators. The footage of his fall became the face of ABC's wide world of sports for decades. But as shocking as the crash was, Venko sustained just a mild concussion and a broken ankle. However, athletes in the stories ahead weren't nearly as lucky. Viewer discretion is advised. February 12, 2010. Just hours before the Winter Olympics opening ceremony in Vancouver, athletes prepared for their final training runs at the Whistler Sliding Center. Among them was Nodar Kumaratashvili, a 21-year-old Georgian luger. Luge ran in Nodar's blood. His father and grandfather both competed in the sport. So, ever since childhood, he dreamt of reaching the Olympics, following in their footsteps, and now he was finally here. But instead of excitement, he felt fear. The Whistler track turned out to be faster than expected. Lugers were reaching speeds of 154 kilometers an hour, far beyond what the designers had initially planned. Furthermore, several athletes had already crashed on this track at high speeds in the days leading up to the Games. Italian gold medalist Armin Zogeller lost control on the 11th curve, but luckily ended up unharmed. However, Romanian luger Violeta Strămăturaru was knocked unconscious after slamming into the track wall and barely escaped with her life. So Nodar had every reason to be worried. Just one day before this crucial run, he called his father, admitting his fear of one particular turn, turn 16, the final curve before the finish line. But for him, quitting was never an option. So, despite his fear, he stepped onto the track with his sled set and his helmet secured and pushed off. The first turns went smoothly, and everything felt controlled. Nodar handled the early sections with ease, picking up speed with every second. The sled struck the inner wall and flipped. Nodar was thrown into the air and launched over the edge of the track. Just seconds before the finish line, he crashed headfirst into an unpadded steel support pole and lost consciousness. CPR began right on the ice, with medical staff performing chest compressions and rescue breathing in a desperate attempt to revive him. But Nodar remained unresponsive. Within minutes, he was airlifted to a nearby hospital. However, despite all efforts, the injuries he sustained were too severe. Shortly after arrival, Nodar Kumaratashvili was pronounced dead. This tragic end marked the first Olympic luge fatality since 1975. The incident prompted officials to implement several urgent safety measures at the Whistler Sliding Center. The men's start position was moved lower on the track to reduce speed. Additional walls were raised in key sections, and the exposed steel beams near the finish were finally padded. However, despite clear issues with the track's design, the official investigation pointed to one primary cause of the tragedy, because the athlete involved had years of experience, and even that couldn't save him. On March 10, 2012, the World Cup ski cross event in Switzerland gave Nick Sorosik one more shot to prove himself on the world stage. Once an alpine skier, he had built a strong reputation in ski cross, earning several World Cup podiums, even after knee injuries forced a break in his career. But now, he was back in strong form and ready to race again. The course was fast, filled with sweeping turns, rollers, and high-impact jumps. However, Nick looked composed and focused. He had done this many times before, so as the countdown hit 0 and the gate dropped, he was off. Everything had gone smoothly. Nick maintained tight lines through the turns and handled the technical sections with ease. As he approached the final feature, a jump near the finish, he was still in the race, gaining speed. Then he finally launched off the jump alongside other racers. But the takeoff was slightly misaligned, and suddenly, Nick went wide. He lost control and crashed into the safety netting near the course boundary at nearly 90 kilometers an hour. Instead of absorbing the impact, the netting rebounded him, launching Nick into a hard-packed snowbank just meters from the finish line. He had landed roughly a meter outside the course in ungroomed snow. The surface there was uneven and not meant for landings at such a high speed. As Nick showed no signs of movement, the crowd feared the worst. Medical personnel arrived on the scene almost immediately, doing everything they could to revive him. A helicopter from Air Glacier was then called in to transport Nick to the Interlaken Hospital, the nearest trauma center equipped for such emergencies. Unfortunately, his condition did not improve. At 12:35 p.m. Swiss time, Nick Sorosik was pronounced dead from severe head trauma sustained during the fall. Swiss authorities opened a formal investigation in the aftermath. The crash was labeled a sporting accident, with no course changes or technical faults identified. Nick's family rejected that explanation and held the organizers responsible, citing a poorly designed jump, ineffective netting, and dangerously placed snowbanks. And they weren't alone. Athletes and coaches in the ski community agreed that with better course preparation, his death might have been prevented. Yet unfortunately, it was too late to change what had happened. But to keep at least Nick's legacy alive, later that year, the Canadian ski cross team debuted a custom race suit that resembled blue jeans. It was inspired by his very first World Cup appearance when he had to wear denim because he didn't have proper gear yet. Nick's parents, in turn, created a foundation in his honor, committed to improving safety standards and supporting young athletes. They've remained steadfast in their mission, but the haunting footage of their son's final moments still lingers, sending chills down their spines. Yet, as devastating as it is to relive his crash on video, nothing compares to witnessing the death of a loved one live on television. January 29, 1994, Garmisch-Partenkirk in Germany. On one of alpine skiing's most challenging courses, the Kandahar, the Women's World Cup downhill was about to begin. Viewers across Europe were tuned in live. Among them, a 4-year-old girl named Melanie, waiting to watch her mother perform. Ulrike Meyer was one of Austria's top skiers, a 2-time Super G world champion, and the only mother competing on the Women's World Cup circuit at the time. She had recently returned to form after a dip in performance and was seriously considering retirement. But with a string of strong results and her daughter cheering her on, she decided to keep going. So Ulrike prepared to race. Melanie sat in front of the television, excited. She had seen her mother win before and had no reason to expect anything different this time. Ulrike left the starting gate with power, immediately accelerating through the steep upper section of the Kandahar course. She quickly settled into a rhythm and entered the lower third of the course, approaching a narrow gliding stretch just under 20 seconds from the finish line. At this point, she was moving at nearly 105 kilometers per hour, a standard speed for elite downhill racers, but one that leaves no room for error. She stayed close to the right-hand side, positioning herself for the final sweeping turn, but then something unexpected happened. Her right ski caught an edge, likely on a patch of soft snow near the course boundary. She lost control instantly. Her skis veered, and her body twisted. Then came the impact, headfirst into a pile of snow, partially covering bales of straw near a timing unit. The crash was devastating. Her helmet detached on contact. She tumbled down the slope, lifeless by the time she came to a stop. A truly shocking moment her little daughter witnessed live on television. The race was halted. A rescue helicopter immediately transported Ulrike to the nearest hospital. However, her condition could not be stabilized. Shortly after arrival, Ulrike Meyer was pronounced dead from a broken neck with critical spinal cord damage sustained in the crash. The news of her death sent shockwaves through the skiing world, since the fatal crash of such an experienced athlete raised serious questions about how this could have happened. And there was more. Meyer herself had reportedly voiced concerns about the course, calling it brutally icy and poorly prepared. As a result, her fiancé filed legal action against the organizers. They acknowledged the poor surface conditions and later implemented significant improvements to equipment, course design, and emergency protocols at international competitions. However, the case itself was eventually dismissed. Skiing is one of the most dangerous sports in the world. According to recent statistics, around 50 people die each year at ski resorts in the US alone. But some athletes take even greater risks. Ski base jumping pushes the boundaries of what's possible in winter sports. Athletes ski toward a cliff at speeds of 90 to 110 kilometers per hour, launch off edges often over 600 meters high, release their skis mid-air, and deploy a parachute before landing. In this discipline, even the smallest mistake can be irreversible. Shane McConkey was a pioneer in combining base jumping with skiing and was one of its most recognizable figures. On March 26, 2009, McConkey was filming a movie shoot with Red Bull, Matchstick Productions, and his close friend J.T. Holmes at the Sas Pordoi Cliff in the Dolomites, Italy. The plan was simple. Ski toward the edge, launch off the cliff, perform a double backflip mid-air, release the skis, deploy the parachute, and glide to safety. Standing at the cliff's edge with the cameras rolling, Shane turned to his crew, smiled, and said his signature phrase before every jump.
Ready, set, go.
Then he launched into the air, executing a clean double backflip, just as planned. But mid-air, when he reached for his quick-release ski bindings, only one ski detached. The other remained stuck. That imbalance sent him into a violent spin. Unable to regain stability, Shane manually released the second ski and tried to deploy his parachute. But by then, the ground was rapidly approaching. J.T. Holmes and the film crew watched helplessly. It was already too late to intervene. Shane struck the snow at an estimated 130 kilometers per hour. The blunt force trauma from the impact was instantly fatal. So, by the time medics arrived, Shane McConkey was pronounced dead at the scene. A mechanical failure, one stuck ski, was the kind of malfunction every ski-based athlete fears most. And Shane's tragic end became a wake-up call for the extreme sports world, prompting serious improvements in gear safety, especially in bindings and release systems. But Shane's legacy didn't end there. His wife, Sherry, founded the Shane McConkey Foundation, while Red Bull, Matchstick Productions, and athletes around the world paid tribute through films and competitions. Shane McConkey redefined what skiing could be, but in pushing the limits of extreme sports, he paid the ultimate price. The next athlete on our list was also drawn to danger, but instead of skis and a parachute, he had a snowboard and a dream to conquer the most dangerous peak on Earth, Everest. Some say you might reach the Everest summit, but only the mountain itself decides who gets to return. In 2001, Marco Siffredi, a French snowboarder and mountaineer, achieved something no one had done before. He became the first person in history to successfully snowboard down Mount Everest. He completed a full descent from the summit via the Norton Couloir, reaching advanced base camp on May 23, 2001. It was a historic feat, but for Marco, it was only the beginning. He wasn't content with just one line down the world's highest mountain. A year later, he returned, this time aiming for something far more dangerous: the Hornbein Couloir. Steeper, narrower, and more exposed. It was considered the holy grail of snowboard descents. One more time, Marco wanted to be the first. So by August 2002, his preparations were underway. Marco knew the risks better than most. His brother Pierre had died in an avalanche in Chamonix, and his friend Felipe Forte was killed in a snowboarding accident in 1999. But even with those losses behind him, Marco pressed on. He was determined to finish what he started. On September 8, 2002, Siffredi and his Sherpas reached the summit of Everest just as the weather began to change. Storm clouds were gathering, and the Sherpas urged him to wait or turn back, but Marco, as always, was determined. Around 3 p.m., he strapped into his board, checked his gear, and waved goodbye. Then he pushed off the summit edge and disappeared down the face. The descent began smoothly. From advanced base camp, his friend Olivier Besson tracked Marco's movements through binoculars. For the first few minutes, everything appeared under control. Then, as Marco entered the Hornbein Couloir, he suddenly vanished into a cloud bank and never came out. A massive search was launched, but there were no signs of Marco Siffredi, and up to this day, his body has never been found. Some believe he fell into a crevasse. Others think he was caught in an avalanche or succumbed to exhaustion or altitude sickness. No one truly knows what happened in those final moments. But one thing is certain: Marco Siffredi's final descent remains one of the most tragic mysteries ever caught on camera. Winter sports captivate the world with their speed, skill, and spectacle. But behind every breathtaking run, there's always a hidden risk. And these tragic accidents are just a few of those that happen to be caught on camera. But for every one recorded, there are countless others. Some ending in injury, others in devastating loss. Which accident struck you the most? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel with more shocking stories on the way.